I've been distance running for almost 3 years, and today I want to do a video talking about a topic that I have been wanting to talk about for a while, but I've been wanting to wait until I felt healthy enough and well enough to talk about it. So I am getting ready to run my 7th marathon, and something that's really changed for me in this training block, I think, is really getting real with my nutrition. And I feel like I've not seen too much content or too many stories around runners and their journey with nutrition. And as someone who struggled with anorexia and battled anorexia in 2016, I'm quite vocal on my podcast about the fact that I do still struggle with those thoughts from time to time, and the ways that I have combated that over the years and just work to get better at it. But when I sort of go back to 2016, and for those who have not listened to the podcast and don't know, I was bullied in middle school, and that sort of then led into an eating disorder after sort of the bullying and the cyberbullying and just not feeling great about myself as a person, feeling very self-conscious. I was diagnosed with anorexia in 2016, and I went on a recovery journey for about 2 years where I was really working to gain the weight back. I lost quite a lot of weight in a short amount of time and had a lot of health complications and just things that were not great and not good. My doctor at the time had actually told me that I couldn't run for about 6 months, and I couldn't be active for 6 months to work just solely on gaining the weight back and just becoming healthy again. But at the time, I wouldn't have called myself necessarily a runner. I would have, I think, been more focused in sports at the time, but definitely running was incorporated in some way, shape, or form. And I will never forget the day that I came back to running and just coming back and getting cleared from the doctors. I went for a run with my dad, and I still remember it to this day. We went out and we started to run, and it genuinely felt like I was like someone gave me new legs or something, because my coordination fell off, everything felt off. And it wasn't until 2018 when I was cleared, in terms of being cleared by my doctor and saying that I'm at a healthy enough weight so that I could go to college. And I feel like everyone sort of struggles in college in terms of gaining that freshman 15 or that. For me, it was also the sorority 40, if anyone else was in the sorority fraternity system. But I feel like for a while in college, I also kind of still battled some issues with sort of like eating disorder thoughts. And I go into depth in a lot of my episodes on my podcast. So if you do want to check that out, there's a link in the description box. But yeah, I guess how that relates to what I want to talk about today is just that, I battled this eating disorder over 10 years ago. And I think something with marathon training as well that I've started to see people talk about more is just when runners decide that they want to marathon train for the first time, and especially those of us who have struggled with our relationship with food over the years, you very quickly realize just how much food you need to fuel yourself in order to run that higher mileage and the higher distances. And I think for a lot of people, they really struggle with this, and they struggle with the idea that they need to consume more, even though they've just run a lot. And I think that some people as well also struggle with the idea that you may gain weight when you're marathon training. And I think that everyone always has this like preconception that if you become a runner, you'll lose weight, and it's a really good form of cardio. And whilst that was my really negative approach to running in the beginning when I was battling my eating disorder, I really worked to change my relationship with running to be quite positive, and I have completely fallen in love with it. But I've always have felt like over the past 3 years that I've been distance running, that there's still been something missing. And I've always been very subconsciously aware of the fact that I was still allowing certain thoughts to still sort of override my ability to eat holistically and eat sort of in a healthier way. I still, to some extent, over the past 3 years, really wanted to have that control over my food and what I was eating and what I was putting in my body. And as a runner, it didn't really necessarily sort of correlate well. And specifically, it was around carbs and just the fact that there was a really old fear that I had from my eating disorder that I was still was still kind of that voice in the back of my head that would come up a lot from time to time of just that fear around carbs. And I feel like it's because around that 2016, 2015 time, it was just like everything was centered around like keto and not eating carbs and being carb free and the thigh gap and all these things. But it was specifically centered around just being as skinny as possible. And so I think now I have definitely worked at getting better and better at battling and silencing those thoughts over the years, but I feel like as a runner I wasn't addressing it properly until this year. And I feel like because I really wanted to get serious about running this year, I finally sat down with myself and just told myself that it was time to be honest and, you know, address and face that specific problem head on. I think that I was quite set and I was quite sort of comfortable in the ways that I was able to control my food and control what I ate. But in reality, I wasn't seeing any progress as a runner for a year. I wasn't seeing any progress over the course of 3 marathons. I literally went from 4:12 to 4:13 back to 4:10. And realistically, with consistent training, I feel like I should have been seeing a lot more progress, but I feel like I also just wasn't fueling myself properly, and I wasn't allowing myself to fuel myself enough to push myself to go further. And so I really wanted to sit down this year and think about how I could improve as a runner in things that weren't necessarily related to running. So I think that you can focus on things like what shoes you're wearing, you know, whether or not you have a coach, what sort of training you do for so long, until you really have to address the other factors that I think a lot of people don't really pay attention to. And whilst I may have done podcast episodes or videos talking about nutrition as a runner, I feel like I always tended to focus a lot more on what gels I'm taking, what I'm eating before the morning of a race. And I feel like this year I really wanted to look at, okay, but what do you eat in general, and what are you eating throughout the week to fuel yourself? Because in reality, I wasn't eating very many carbohydrates. I wasn't consuming enough carbs to push my body in the way that I wanted to. And when I sat down and really got honest about this, I really wanted to set a challenge for myself. And I've done a whole podcast episode on this, so if you want to hear me go into even more detail about this, you can go and listen to this episode. But at the start of this year, around springtime, I really wanted to challenge myself to incorporate more carbs into my diet. And at first I thought about, you know, really documenting it in a way where I was like, you know, showing every single time that I had a pastry or a pizza or, you know, whatever. But in reality, I just thought that I didn't really want to showcase it and put it on blast in that way. And I didn't want to have to like rely on that to kind of be like my means of like, you know, fixing and healing my relationship with food. I really wanted this to be more of a thing between like me, myself, and I. And so I really focused, you know, spring, summer, and now we're going into autumn, and just on fixing and healing my relationship with food, and specifically just incorporating more carbs into my diet. And I feel like I've really seen the payoff with my running specifically. And I also feel like in turn, I've just felt overall a lot stronger, a lot healthier, and a lot just better. I feel like, you know, I've been able to then focus on like areas like sleep and just other areas in my life as well to just help me become a better athlete. But I feel like, you know, when you look at all of my races this year, it's just been PB after PB. And now that I'm getting ready to pursue and go into Chicago Marathon 2023, when I was going into this race, when I actually got this place in this race, I was still injured. And I never thought that I would be pursuing my big goal time of a sub 3:30, but here we are getting ready to try and hit that sub 3:30. And I feel like a big component of being able to run at the pace that I've been training at is definitely just the fact that I've been fueling myself a lot better than I'd say I was a year ago. And it's just something that I'm really proud of, and something that I want to share the message of. And just because I feel like I've not seen anyone else talk about this, because I feel like it's a bit of a taboo topic, and I feel like people get weird when you're talking about food around runners, but I want to kind of not only sort of bridge sort of that gap between like those of us who have struggled with our relationship with food and those of us who also just like have completely fallen in love with distance running. I feel like in a way, distance running has really helped me heal my relationship with food. And if you're also on a similar journey, then I hope that this inspires you and just encourages you to keep working at your relationship with food as well, so that you can also in turn become a better runner.